So Donald Trump is under a gag order in his hush money trial, the judge blasting the former president for, quote, threatening, inflammatory, denigrating statements against people at all levels of the justice system, including jurors. The order prevents Mr. Trump from criticizing his former attorney, Michael Cohen, or adult film star Stormy Daniels. Both are expected to testify during the trial. Attorney Seth Berenzweig joins me now. Seth, thanks so much for being here. So what is Donald Trump allowed to say and what can he not say?
Well, Mr. Trump certainly lit a match yesterday to the situation with his incendiary comment on social media attacking the judge and his daughter. Promptly after that, there were two orders that were entered. The first order was a gag order. It states that Mr. Trump cannot make negative comments or anything of an aggressive or threatening nature with respect to witnesses, jurors, court personnel, court staff. He is allowed to mention Alvin Bragg, but it is otherwise a broad prohibition. It's also interesting to note that shortly around that time, also Judge Merchan entered another order, and it was short and sweet, but it warned everybody, including the attorneys in the case, that they must abide by all court orders, and anyone that does not do that risks criminal contempt. So clearly Judge Merchan is sending a message. There's a new sheriff in town, and he's going to apply this very strictly.
So Donald Trump's lawyers are not commenting on the gag order, but his campaign called it, quote, unconstitutional, saying basically that, quote, American voters have a fundamental right to hear the uncensored voice of the leading candidate for the highest office in the land. How about that argument?
Well, that's essentially a First Amendment argument for freedom of speech, and the court summarily rejected that. Certainly, there's a balancing that occurs in this sort of thing, and there is a need for the efficient expedition of justice, and a criminal defendant of a very high level cannot engage in actions that would prejudice the proceedings or interfere with the smooth administration of justice. So that First Amendment argument was considered by the judge. It was rejected, and this is really also non-appealable. They can try to fight this, but this is set in stone. Judge Merchan is not going to handle this case as Judge Engoron did also in New York. This is going to be applied very strictly, and he's made a very specific warning that there will be criminal contempt consequences waiting in the wings if someone crosses the line.
Here's another thing that Judge Merchan said. He said he was, quote, unpersuaded by Donald Trump's lawyers that the former president has refrained from commenting on this case compared to others. So basically the judge reviewed Donald Trump's public statements in other cases when he was deciding whether to impose these restrictions. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that Judge Merchan is demonstrating that he is taking a balanced and holistic review of the record, and he's being very careful. Look, he knows that this is going to be one of the most intensely watched legal unfolding developments and dramas of the year. This is going to be the first criminal trial. Who knows? It may be the only trial. He knows that everything's going to be placed under a microscope. I think that he balanced this under the First Amendment in a very careful and appropriate way. This is really more of a common way where the court is very careful to ensure that when the proceeding moves forward, that there's nothing that interferes with the administration of justice. So this was a strong signal, and I believe that as he made it very clear, he will enforce it very strictly.
Seth, I want to get your take on what becomes of Donald Trump's attorneys. So as you know, some of the lawyers there involved in the 2020 election fight, John Eastman, he was known as the architect of the plan to halt, Congress's certification of Joe Biden's presidential victory. He's facing possible disbarment, and he's one of more than a dozen Trump allies to be charged in the Georgia election interference case. So he's pleaded not guilty, but it's sort of an occupational hazard at this point. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that it's really interesting to note that Donald Trump relied very heavily on the lawyers. Of course, John Eastman, who is about to have an announcement from California any hour now, where I believe that it will probably lead to an announcement of disbarment. You've got Jeffrey Clark, whose disbarment hearing in Washington, D.C. started yesterday. Mr. Trump relied upon the attorneys to wave a false flag of legitimacy for the attempt to overturn the election, and specifically the Eastman memo laid out the false elector scheme, which was infamous and that led to his famous mugshot, as well as all the others in Georgia. This is going to be an important message sent by the state disciplinary bars, who really have the authority to basically execute what is tantamount to a death penalty from the professional world for attorneys, that this is an intentional alleged fraud that was committed not only relative to his representations in that case, but really upon the election in general. So I believe that any hour now we will likely hear that he will be disbarred. He will appeal it. The appeal will be unsuccessful. Jeffrey Clark and all the others that you've mentioned probably are facing a similar fate. And this shows a message that at least there's some kind of an internal mechanism for enforcement for rules and ethics within the professional bar for attorneys in the United States.
Really interesting. Seth Berenzweig, thank you.